Welcome everybody. I'll be showing another game from my first time playing in the Polish Ekstraliga, the first Polish league, where I was playing for Racibor on board 1, and in round 3 we played against Gliwice, and on board 1 I was playing against Jacek Tomczak, and I just realized when doing a Google search that I actually played against Tomczak before in 2007, and back then I lost. So let's see how this game went. I was playing with the black pieces. My opponent, as usual, went e4, and I go e5 and bishop b5, and now I'm mixing it up a little bit, playing this move for the first time, g6, which is an interesting way to play here in the Royal Lopez. Bishop g7 now takes, b5, the bishop can go to b3 or c2. However, I think on c2 it's better placed. d6, and my opponent was thinking for quite some time, and now he played d5, which is a very principled approach here. Of course, white could also play h3 or castle. Probably h3 would be necessary to stop bishop g4. Now d5, knight a5, and here's an interesting sequence now. Castle, that makes sense, knight e7, and white could just play normally, just develop his pieces, and maybe he's a little bit better, but it's a complicated position, and I was happy to get this kind of game here. Bishop d2 is an exchange sacrifice, which has been seen quite a number of times in these kind of positions, and I knew about it as well. And I wasn't happy to see this move because the positions are not that easy to play for black, even though I knew, objectively speaking, it's okay. So what's the point? White is attacking the knight on a5, and if black plays a move like c5 to protect the knight, then white can exchange the dark squared bishop from black, and this bishop is the most important minor piece for black in this position. It protects the dark squares around the king, it exerts pressure on this long diagonal, so black doesn't want to have this bishop exchanged. The drawback of bishop d2 is that it leaves this pawn on b2 hanging, so I take the pawn, hit the rook on a1. White takes on a5, and I take the rook. So white has sacrificed an exchange and a pawn, but what is he getting for it? Let's see, knight c3. And I definitely want to keep my bishop, so I don't take on c3. I play bishop b2. And here Tomczak had a really creative idea. However, I'm not sure how good it is. Maybe white should just play a move like bishop d3, and he certainly has good compensation. I think we're just going to ignore the bell, because it's just some package that is not for me, but for my neighbor, and somebody else can open the door. Alright, so instead of bishop d3, Tomczak played queen b1, and now bishop a3, keeping the bishop, but you can see that I had to leave this diagonal, and of course that makes my dark squares a little bit vulnerable. And here this creative idea, queen a1 with the threat of knight b1, double attack, bishop and rook, and now I played castle, knight b1, bishop c5 is forced, and bishop c3 back. Very interesting play. Now white has the bishop and the queen on this diagonal, and I was quite impressed during the game. The computer, however, as you can also see with the bar on the left side, is not very impressed. This is already clearly better for black. Maybe I panicked a little bit or was too convinced of the power of this bishop on the long diagonal that I played f6 right away with the intention to give back my material to exchange this bishop. The computer says that's not necessary, just play h6 to give the king some space, and if bishop h8, threatening mate on g7, then f6, bishop takes f6, and here just king h7, and black is clearly better. Of course, white has some compensation, but it shouldn't be enough to compensate for an exchange. Instead, I played f6 right away, bishop takes f6, and gave back the exchange. Because also with this position I was not unhappy. The material is equal, but I have the bishop paired, and especially this bishop is very strong, as I can control the dark squares, which are quite weakened in the white position. Also, this bishop doesn't make a very good impression. So my opponent didn't trade queens, good choice, because as usual we can decide by who has the safer king, and it's very clear here that white has the safer king, because my king is lacking protection in form of the pawns. So this is a question you can ask yourself: if a queen swap is on the horizon, which king is safer? And if your king is safer, then it could make sense to avoid the trade of queens. So I play king g7 to once again prepare the queen trade with queen f6. I also had other options here. For example, h6 or also queen g7, which the computer likes a little bit better. I think I was concerned about rook e1 and e5 right away, but well, not too much is happening. Black is coming with his counterplay against the pawn on f2, and this is okay for black. If knight takes d7, then in the end some more material will drop. Queen d4, this pawn is hanging, and the white pieces are just not coordinated enough. So this might have been better than king g7. Queen f6, and Tomczak does the right thing, avoids the queen trade once again with queen g3. Bishop b4. This move was directed a little bit against, well, a number of things, but first and foremost this break was worrying me because it opens up the position, opens the position against my vulnerable king. And also, in case a rook appears on e1, the knight would be in a pin. Knight b3. And here I played bishop c3, which looked quite logical to me. c5 was a strong move I didn't consider. White, I think, has to take this pawn en passant. Otherwise, I just get a very strong pawn majority here on the queen side. So d takes c6. Knight takes c6. Rook d1 and bishop e6. Now my pieces can develop freely, and this is comfortable for black. Let's follow the game. Bishop c3, rook d1, bishop d7, and my opponent was getting quite low on time. The position is around equal, but it feels easier to play for black. My moves are pretty clear. Next rook f8, and then we can see maybe push the pawns here on the queen side. Maybe trade queens somehow. So I think e5 is a very good practical decision, because now the position gets simplified and it should lead to a draw. So we're trading here all the pieces. Now white gets access to the c5 square. Bishop f5. Going passive here with bishop c8 just did not look right to me. White could play d6, for example. Well, okay, this move the computer doesn't like too much, because rook a7 and I can get out. But something I did not like about this at all, maybe rook e1, hitting the pawn on e5. Yeah, actually I think I was looking at this. Rook takes e5, c6, and this still looked not so good with the pin here. So I did not play this. I didn't want to be worse. So I played bishop f5, bishop takes, knight e6 check. Now white gets back the pawn, and I play rook a7, and here my opponent surprised me. It was a positive surprise. I really expected him to play d6 with the threat d7, d8, so I have to take this pawn. And by the way, this is why I put my king on f7, not on f6, so that after rook takes d6, there's no check, and I can take on c7, threatening back rank checkmate. But after g3, black is up a pawn. However, this rook is too active. This is a draw. For example, rook a7, rook b6, stopping my pawns advancing. And I was going to try something like this, but in the end this should be a draw. So I was expecting this and the game to more or less end in a draw. So I was quite happy to see this move knight e6, because with knights on the board still, there's of course more potential, and here black is better. King e7, g4, knight d6, and now we are both in good amount of time trouble, so some mistakes were made. f3 should be played here, most likely. King f1, and why should f3 be played? Because now knight e4 was quite strong, but I didn't see this move, it just didn't occur to me. The idea is to go to c3. I actually had the same idea, but I played a different move. This would be just incredibly strong. The knight can also be supported by the pawn on b4, hitting d5. This knight is kind of dominated, doesn't have a square. Would have been really unpleasant for white. So I went b4 with this idea, knight b5, knight c3. So same idea, just different execution. Here white though had another way to stay in the game with f4. However, still this would be uncomfortable to play for sure. White would need to be very precise to keep the game going. But with correct defense, he has good drawing chances. So knight c5 was played instead of f4. Now a5, easy move for me. Rook e1, and here once again I had a much better move, which is knight f7. Just defend the pawn passively, bring the king to d6, and if knight e4, activate the rook. This looks more or less winning for black. So I played knight b5, which also looked really good and it worked well in the game. Here knight e4 is strictly necessary, stopping my king from advancing. And the point is, the idea that I had, rook c7, can be answered by f4 suddenly, getting counterplay along the e-file. And I cannot take this pawn because of knight c3 check, picking up the loose knight on b5. So this would be bad. And if I go, let's say rook d7 here, then white can play d6. Very nice tactics with the knight and the rook here. Knight takes d6 and knight c5, taking on e5 next, and the black advantage is more or less gone. So after knight e4, I would have needed to find this nice prophylactic move, rook a8, so that in case of f4 I could pin the pawn of rook f4 and then it would be winning. So after rook a4, black keeps a clear advantage, but it's not clear yet if he's going to win. After knight d3, it's pretty much game over. King d6, rook takes e5, and white is actually a pawn up at the moment, but look at the position. The main problem is these two pawns on the queen side, and this one is going to drop. And then it's just hopeless for white. Also my pieces are much more active. Now we had reached the time control, move 40 has been made and the position is completely winning for black. My opponent played a few more moves, but it did not change anything. Here I could have also taken on a2 right away, or king a4, king a3 is also an interesting plan, because the white counterplay with his pawn side here on the king side is just way too slow. I played rook d7, which is also fine, restricting the knight a little bit. I like this move, activating my rook. Now I take rook b8, bring the king back. Now f4, knight back, f5. White is trying to get something here, but it's just too slow. King d5, stopping this pawn with my king. Rook a8, b3, rook takes a5 check. And here I play king c4. There's also a cute line with king e4. But there was just no necessity to play this, even though it would have been cute. The idea is knight c5 check, king f3, knight takes d7, b2, and it's a picturesque position because black cannot stop this pawn from queening. And knight e5 check doesn't change anything after king e4. But there was no need to do something like that, and I just played king c4, rook c5 check, king b4, rook c8, b2, and my opponent resigned because of the rook b8. The knight goes in between, and there's nothing stopping this pawn from queening. So an interesting game with ups and downs, interesting opening for sure with this ambitious exchange sacrifice and very creative play by Tomczak, but it turns out that it was to my favor and that black got the advantage. I panicked a little bit, gave the exchange back too early, but the position still remained more comfortable. And then the endgame should have been a draw, but my opponent missed this move d6 and in time trouble went astray, and I could get the full point. Let me know if you have any questions about the game, just write in the comments below, and I will soon see you in the next video. Bye bye.